Hello and welcome to another video. After about 6 hours of videos yesterday, I'm back today making this not live because I wanted to get a little bit of a break on that and just put together a bit of a picture on what now looks pretty decidedly to be Manchester United's next new coach, Ruben Amorim, which we pretty much knew yesterday, but things have been moving forward today. Now, very quickly, where does this stand as of right now? United have officially expressed interest in triggering the release clause of Ruben Amorim for 10 million euros. Sporting, as a listed company, and this is normal for these Portuguese clubs, put out an official statement about this and a filing. And in essence, while it's just an interest in paying it, that's as much as saying we have an offer from United to trigger the release clause of Ruben Amorim and to bring him in. I'm thinking about Bruno from back in the day, about the filings that they made around that time. So, yeah, essentially it tells you that United are intent on now getting this done. They're willing to pay. They have an agreement with Ruben Amorim on all of the details on his side. It's fine-tuning the details. There are people from Manchester United. It's been reported that it's Omar Barada and Dan Ashworth. I believe that to be true, but I do not know. I just know that there are representatives from United in Portugal today and this evening in Lisbon with a view to try and wrap up the deal tonight and get all of it sorted after their game. Obviously, rapidly evolving there. Nothing really to worry about. The questions are mostly over when can he start? Can we agree on how this is done? The release clause, it may not be paid exactly in that way because of the way that the rules are different. It may be United, again, pay a little bit more than the release clause in order to free him from his contract now, as there's some information that otherwise he might have a much later starting date. It's all there, but it's all being worked out, and there's a good relationship between the two clubs, and there should be no issues in getting this done. United would hope to have him in this week and get him in ahead of Chelsea. That may not be possible when you add in things like the work permit, but they're working on it to get it done as soon as possible. So what is so exciting about this? I'm happy to say that I've watched a lot of Ruben Amorim. I've been following Portuguese football for some time. If you know me, then you'll know that I've maybe at times gone over the line on it, but I like to watch the Portuguese league as much as possible. Since before Bruno Fernandes, and I've been following them especially. Ruben Amorim has been my favorite manager of choice for a long, long time now. The manager I think is the best possible available manager that we ever had a real shot at getting. Terrified me that he was almost going to go to Liverpool and against City. Now, Liverpool would have been almost more scary because one of the things I pointed out about Ruben Amorim and his style is that he fit the Liverpool style of play really well. Now, one of the reasons they didn't hire him is apparently that he's stubborn and sticking to his back three system. That's what's been reported. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. And for Liverpool, given that they're a bit further ahead in their squad building, they have players like Trent, they have players Salah, and they have these players that they've really built their squad around following Klopp. It makes sense from a continuity standpoint that maybe they would rather not change that. For United, I think that it's up in the air for us to be able to change our formation and move things around. So in this video, I want to talk a bit about Ruben Amorim. One of the things I want to somewhat dispel the myth of and what the difference is and why Ruben Amorim's accomplishments are so impressive. Is there's a lot of comparisons to Erik Ten Hag and a hype about, Erik Ten Hag before he arrived. But at that time, there was a few things that people overlooked quite strongly that I pointed out, which were my concerns. This is not to be a big thing on knocking a previous manager or anything like that, but to accentuate some of the differences in what has been accomplished between Erik Ten Hag and Ruben Amorim and why there's some differences, because I actually don't find them similar at all. The other factors in terms of intangibles that are not going to show up when we start going through stats and breakdowns and things like that are the factors of things like communication and personality. These are huge, huge strong points for Ruben Amorim, things that had him getting the admiration of people from around the world, around Europe, for his coaching style. In press conferences, he's funny, he's entertaining, he's interesting. He never criticizes his players publicly. He avoids confrontations. He avoids giving excuses about referees. Quite specifically, he avoids a lot of those things. And is always willing to answer questions, doesn't seem to get upset or offended by media, is quick to take responsibility in public. A lot of good things that have earned him a hell of a lot of loyalty from the staff at the club as well as the players, and make him quite a leader, one that people think is someone that they would follow. And I think that is an important trait that United were looking for in their next manager. There are a lot of tactical similarities between him and similarities in his hire between him and managers previously hired by Dan Ashworth and who he's previously worked with, including Graham Potter, De Zerbi, and even potentially others that they've looked at. The style of bringing in a young manager who maybe hasn't had a huge job yet, like they've done at Brighton, but instead getting somebody who's a bit more accomplished, because it is, of course, a bigger step up to Manchester United. So let's look at it. Let's talk about Ruben Amorim and break him down a little bit further. So obviously, he's 39 years old. I think this is a big thing that goes under the radar in the comparisons between him and the Ten Hag hire. This is a guy who was hired for Sporting at 35 and won them their first title in 19 years. Protege. When you look at age and you look at the age of managers, he's doing things that are unbelievable given his age and level of experience. That's important. Realize he's 15 years of managing experience behind Erik Ten Hag doing what he's doing right now, just to compare him to our last manager. And that was why when he was coming up through the coaching ranks and in his first jobs, there's a lot of comparisons to Jose Mourinho. Former midfielder, he actually played with Victor Lindelof at Benfica for a few years. So that should tell you how young he is. He's, I think he was born within 7 or 8 days of Cristiano Ronaldo. So he would have also witnessed him as a Portuguese player and athlete, Cristiano Ronaldo, making that move at the same age he was from Sporting to Manchester United. I like the history in that and seeing him become one of the greats. And now looking at a move like that himself as a very young coach and manager, someone who will learn and continue to grow into the job. This season, he has transformed Sporting into one of the best teams in Europe. I mean, you look at it, I feel comfortable in saying that. They play Manchester City this week, so I guess we'll see as well, or next week rather. He may not be there for that. Maybe that's a good thing. But, they've won every game this season in the league. 2 wins and a draw in the Champions League. And their record in the league is incredible, having conceded only 2 goals all season, a plus 28 differential after 9 games. They will be in a cup game tonight that I will be doing a watch along to hang out with. So, come hang out. We'll talk about his tactics. We'll look at all of that. He had a brief stint as the coach of Braga. 13 games, incredible win rate. He actually went up against the big teams in Portugal and I believe did not lose a single one, and then was hired for 10 million for Sporting, where he's had a fantastic record. One of the things that kind of goes under the radar, with him, and I'll talk about his staff in a moment, is when he came into Sporting, he first worked on improving the defense and making them very solid, and then evolved more into the attack. And then when there were some holes opening up in his tactical structures, mostly last season, he has made some big adjustments, maybe not huge adjustments, but adjustments that are important to fix it, to improve it, to fix it, to change those things and reduce some of those weaknesses and shore things up a bit. So he's an evolving manager. He's an evolving manager who is somebody that will grow with the team, with the club, and expect to get better and better. And that is a huge part of it. That is a really huge part of why he would be selected. Again, when you look at managers who someone like Ashworth has brought in, not only does he have a tendency to bring in managers who are interested in this kind of 3 at the back. I mean, not to bring up Gareth Southgate, but Graham Potter, De Zerbi, and Gareth Southgate, all 3 managers who have links to Dan Ashworth, play 3 at the back pretty regularly. So I find that to be rather interesting. But of course, this being a more accomplished club manager, more exciting. But again, that youth and that growth we will see. In terms of his coaching staff, it's important to note that as a young coach, he does take a lot of training sessions, as far as I understand, and is a little bit more hands-on in that respect, which I think is good. He has two. I mean, these guys, 29 and 28, two of his main assistants that he brought with him from Braga. Realize that those guys were 25 years old and 24 years old when he brought them to Sporting. That's quite incredible that they came with him. He brought in Jorge Vital later, an older guy to come in as a goalkeeping coach, and he's stuck with an assistant manager who is already there. So it may be that the club want to keep with a couple of staff that were there prior, and that he'd be happy to stick with them. He's stuck with the conditioning coach that they had as well. So we'll see. We'll see what he does there. I would imagine he'll bring a few people, but I imagine as well he's happy to work with some of the people that Ineos or new management will want to have appointed. Potentially Georgeson, as someone Wilcox appointed, and I don't think there will be a conflict there. But I do think he will bring in his own coaches. One of the things to note when I mention his accomplishments, it's all about relativity. And this was something that I personally felt was missed, was a bit skimmed over when in previous discussions over Erik Ten Hag and Ajax and his accomplishments, but mostly not because he didn't do what he was supposed to or didn't have great accomplishments at Ajax, but in comparison to Ruben Amorim. This is the Eredivisie. Now, when Ten Hag arrived, or before Ten Hag arrived, you can see that Ajax were, in terms of payroll, higher than everybody else. But look at the numbers, about 15 million. Now, one of the biggest indexes in correlating to league position is payroll. And it usually tells you whether a team is performing as they should or underperforming. Ajax have always been the biggest club in the Dutch league for a long, long time. And we could go years back, even when they weren't winning. So they were underperforming. So see here, they weren't up to 2013-14. When they were not winning, they were not paying more money. They did not have the biggest payroll. You can see before Ten Hag arrived, they started to spend more and build themselves back up and start to build this team. And then by the time he arrived, they had, not this year, but the following year, the year before he'd arrived, they'd established themselves with the biggest payroll. Now, it's actually still competitive at this point, but look at what happens throughout the tenure with Van der Sar, with Overmars, and with Erik Ten Hag. This year, still a bit competitive, but Ajax maintained 2 years in a row of having the highest payroll, and the numbers are growing. It gone from 15 million to within 2 years, nearly double the payroll. And the gap starts to grow, where they're doubling the next two teams and getting a huge gap between them and the following ones. And then as it continues, the gap between Ajax and everybody else continues to grow significantly, approaches 40 million. That means during Ten Hag's tenure, not only were they very successful, but they tripled their salaries at Ajax in that time. So they were spending money to become the biggest team in the league again and to start winning things. And you can see around when he left, they had tripled the salary of before Ten Hag joined. So this is not to critique his accomplishments at Ajax, but it was to be expected. It was a club concerted effort with Overmars, with Van der Sar, with all of that, to rebuild Ajax, starting in actually the year before Ten Hag arrived, to rebuild and to make them into a force. Now, you'll note here that after he's left and Van der Sar's left and all of that, the gaps have actually dropped, to where it's become a little bit more competitive and they've been underperforming. And as you can see, as of the current year, PSV and Feyenoord are almost caught up with them now in terms of spending. So there's a little bit more parity in the Dutch league. And point being, he accomplished very great things at Ajax, but also very expected things. When you compare it to the Bundesliga, for example, you would expect Bayern to win the league every year because they have a similar thing. It's not a competitive league. And if someone's only experience was in the Bundesliga, you would wonder, at least. I'm not saying you say they're shit, they're no good or anything like that, but this is the same with League One in PSG. You would not necessarily be able to judge them that well and how they would transition based on that alone. one-team leagues. Now, if we flip over to Portugal, here's the team that Ruben Amorim has taken over. They're not historically the biggest team in Portugal in terms of their wages, the salary, spending, all of that. They actually have a smaller budget than Ajax at this point in time. And he wins the league in his first season, losing one game, nearly going invincible. And it was actually after the league was already done and dusted. He lost in the 33rd out of 34th week. So you can see that is what makes it such an incredible accomplishment. As they've continued, this hasn't really changed. Sporting are still never really the biggest team in Portugal, and the gap between them and the rest of the league is not that big. And they actually have a smaller payroll than Ajax by some measure, nearly half Ajax's payroll. So point being, when you're looking at accomplishments and some of the differences, all got to be relative to the state of the club. When you look at what he's doing at Sporting, what's so incredible about it is winning 2 leagues and on pace for a third in his 4 full years in charge, is doing so without being the biggest club in Portugal, in fact, being third, and being closer to the teams below him than to the team in first place. Let's compare it to the Premier League, which is, as you can see by this chart, has probably the most parity. That's why this is the toughest league overall when you compare it to other ones in terms of what is on offer and what you have to compete with. So it would be akin to winning the league regularly, maybe with Aston Villa or Tottenham, when you look at the gap between the top team and where he's at. Now, there's more teams in the middle to compete with, which is why it's harder, but it's more akin to winning the league with Aston Villa or Tottenham. That's what makes them more impressive, because they're closer to these teams than they are to them. And this is, again, one of the reasons when you're looking at teams and comparing managers, you look at Brentford 19th and Ipswich 20th in payroll. That's why Thomas Frank is admired very much, is despite, this, they're impressive. You look at Bournemouth and what Areola is doing there, impressive. And so it's always got to be relative, and it's the same with Brighton, and why you've looked at that and said, hey, these are interesting things, because they have a low payroll, but when they can get into that top 6 and top 8 with that, they are overachieving. And why you look at us with the second highest payroll, significantly underachieving. And it also tells you that Liverpool and Klopp and now Slot are doing quite a good job relative to their payrolls. But if you look at years past, historically, you look at it compared to the top teams, it would be akin to Tottenham, Villa, or Liverpool, which is why it's so admirable what Ruben Amorim is doing at such a young age, given the position of his team, having that kind of payroll. And when you compare them to the European results, yeah, it's a little bit tough, but realize that their payroll is equal to Sheffield United's payroll. That is the equivalence. So how would they do in Europe? Obviously, it doesn't quite always work out that way, but that's what makes his accomplishments so dramatic and so incredible for Sporting, is that it's not as obviously competitive as the Premier League, but it is not a one-team league, and they're not the biggest team in that league either. So there's a lot of differences in comparing what did a person do. You have a lot of not a lot of question marks, but when you're hiring somebody who's won in a one-team league, that's great. They've done amazing work. When you're hiring someone who's winning in not a one-team league, it answers a few more questions about how they can do in terms of their overall ability to overachieve, to get more out of a team. And I think that's what's very impressive. And that's one of the things that we've seen, that we've heard from about Ruben Amorim, that is the most impressive. He's got a 71% win rate there. Just fantastic stuff. And this is the game we'll be watching later to hang out with. He's shored it up quite dramatically. So when we look at in prior years, this is last year playing against Benfica, and one of the things that you'll see with Sporting and with Ruben Amorim, I think that we will find, is that his record in big games hasn't been incredible, but he wins a lot of the games that he should, most all the games that he should, and it's because he's a very systematic manager, laying the foundations, play the way you should, and one of the areas where he will want to grow is with his adaptability. But you can see in this game, for example, last year, the way he sets up his team. Narrow forwards. He kind of had started transitioning towards this later in the season, and it's how he plays now. That kind of floaty striker, this 3-4-3. He has a big impetus on these fullbacks, and very often one of his center backs has been a converted fullback, and one of his fullbacks has been a converted winger. So again, not dissimilar to things that Graham Potter has done. Not saying that's the only manager, but Graham Potter is someone who's done that as well. This year in the games that are set up, similar idea. These are not really 10s, but inside forwards, and some of them have maybe a little bit more of a floaty 10 characteristic, while other one may have more of a second striker. So you'll often have two running in the channels and one that floats around. So that could be a perfect role for Bruno Fernandes, or personally, I think it's a perfect role for Amad Diallo, depending on which side you want to do it, while you could have, two strikers together in a pairing of whatever you might want here. Rashford and Højlund, I think, is the perfect fit, but Rashford and Xerxes and Højlund, Garnacho and Højlund as well. There's a lot of permutations that could work there. He needs a very technical, very strong, very attacking player on this right side. And I'll go through who I would believe may be the best fits. And the biggest question mark we have over here is on this left-hand side. He likes to have a converted winger. Nuno Santos was pretty much a winger, converted into this role. So, yeah, in terms of the midfielders, it fits to a T, Kobbie Mainoo and Manuel Ugarte. But there's other players that could play in there, Mason Mount as well, but Mount could also fit into one of these roles if he's ever healthy. So I think it would be interesting to look at, and I want to explain a little bit how does he actually play and how it might look, because there are differences. I've seen a lot of people talking about how he builds up in a 3-1-6. It's completely and totally different to how Ten Hag builds up, and I think that there's a lot of huge differences, and it's one principle in particular that has been a hallmark of Ruben Amorim's time as a manager so far: central compactness, and that has been our biggest weakness. He's a manager who very, very much puts an emphasis when he sets up and how he plays in shoring up the central areas of the pitch and pushing people into the wider areas. So, that is what we need to look at. So I want to show a couple of differences. Now, this is what I've plugged in that I think would be a very interesting way of setting up his team with players who we could expect to come back soon in Lenny Yoro. I think Lenny Yoro will be a staple in his side. He's really our only channel defender. Now, you don't necessarily have to have a channel defender in all of these instances on these sides. Gonzalo Inacio is not that great of a channel defender. He's not that fast. He's not that physical. But he does well in that team for a reason. In the past, Ruben Amorim has also converted left backs into this position. So if Shaw were ever healthy, yeah, he would be a good fit into this position, I think, as well. I've put Alejandro Garnacho here for now, and I'll explain why, even though I'm not saying that that's the long-term answer. But it's because in this position, a converted left winger who likes to play from the wider areas and carry through the middle third. I think that actually is a strength of Alejandro Garnacho, maybe over others, is his ball progression via carrying. We've seen that statistically, and that might be where he's best. I think Mazraoui's better than Dalot for this position, because I think he's much better in these final thirds and in certain aspects of this buildup. You could interchange this front three like crazy, okay? Bruno can fit into here, and you could swap sides, things like that. Xerxes can fit into this. There's a lot of different ways that this could set up. And obviously we don't know what he's going to do, but I would be surprised if he goes away from his back three. Now, how do they build up? Because there's actually, it's really intriguing the way that he does this. And you need someone in the central center back position who's very good at passing the ball. Interestingly, I think Harry Maguire fits it quite well. Lisandro Martinez could step into there as well in doing this, and it makes them almost a pseudo midfielder at times in the way that he builds up. So he will want his fullbacks kind of staying wide and creating this width in this area. One of the adjustments that he's made in the past, and I'll talk about a few different things, is he used to keep his wingers wider, and the fullbacks would stay really wide as well. And so when you had these teams, when you had this stepping up, you would he would still stay compact in the middle, which is a weakness of ours currently, but this would lead to a lot of gaps in these areas and a lot of angles for players to come into. I don't want to tell you exactly how he's adjusted that, because this is where people have talked about some of the issues with transitions that he used to have. And not all of this is totally new, but is the way that he's played. In building up from the back, he starts, of course, with this back three and has his pivot both come back, okay? One thing, this is not a 3-1-6 where he's expecting one to come running up the pitch. Both of these pivot players come back deep. His fullbacks will stay wide. Now, what happens here is quite interesting. If these angles are blocked off, if he cannot make these passes, the rotation occurs, and these players are a little big on this. It'll be cool to do this on the tactics board later. His pivot will drop out and sort of move in behind these, like deeper than behind his fullbacks. His central center back will step up. These two will come a little bit more narrow, and he will expect his wingers, his inside forwards, to drop in. So you can see that this creates a lot of attack, a lot of angles through the buildup without exposing yourself to this fragility. As these fullbacks are going up, you have the midfielders behind them to block off those areas. You have a center back stepping up into these areas, and you have the wingers coming in further rather than staying really high in this first phase for buildup, so you don't get so many gaps. Now, depending on which direction it goes, you can get this rotation. So a lot of times you'll see passes straight from these from the center backs. They're going to look to break the press where three players will come out, because now you have three players sitting behind that three-player press. So they're looking to pass it into there. The midfielders are not expected necessarily to make big progressive passes. If there's a good pass open to a winger here who's not under pressure, they will do so. But otherwise, more often than not, they're kicking it out sideways to those fullbacks. This is why players like Manuel Ugarte, who are not known for their progressive passing, have been extremely useful in his build-up structures, because you don't need as much line breaking from them. You're expecting your center backs to be pretty good at line breaking, but not necessarily these pivot players. They need to be good on the ball, able to turn, able to evade pressure. Both Kobbie Mainoo and Ugarte are strong in that, and oftentimes just kick the ball out to the fullbacks. The fullbacks then can move up into these wider areas. The center back can step in a bit. You can keep these players wide, and start the attack, right? And this is where you want it, where they can create a lot of overloads, where essentially in a traditional sense, you'd be using just a fullback here. Overloading, the difference, of course, is you do have a few more players behind. In some of these instances, this is where you'll see a little bit more of a 3-1-6, as one of these midfielders starts to make an extra attacking run to help in the overload. And that is, is something that's just ordinary in that attack, but it's really key that everybody is stepping up very high in these situations. Sometimes what will happen then, obviously, if the ball goes to the other side, then the other fullback drops in and helps you make a little bit more of a back four in these things. So there's once you evade kind of that first press, once his teams tend to beat that, they are attacking pretty quickly in transitions. Again, not dissimilar to Liverpool, and not dissimilar to some of the strengths that we've had. That's why it's not Liverpool, it's not City, it is its own thing. And you do still get attacking momentums, but you can see with these three players kind of running at you to make an overload, how dangerous that could be. But that doesn't mean you're always going for it. And the verticality is something that is addressed in more of the final phases rather than in the first phase, just trying to keep your wingers forward and throw the ball up to them. And generally his central striker that he likes a lot, a bit of a talisman with Gyökeres, is moving around a lot based on which side the buildup is coming through to try to help create those overloads, get involved, and get himself on the ball. So a really interesting system that I think will help negate a lot of the weaknesses that we have. And frankly, it could absolutely work with someone like Garnacho here. This is not meant as an insult to Garnacho. It's playing into his strengths. And he's liked converting wingers into that position. They get involved. They get in the attack. And, being able to beat players out wide is a strong suit of someone like that. When pressing, they will press really high. And oftentimes you're going to have these midfielders stepping up into the gaps in between the fullbacks on either side. But one of the things he also does as a rotation is when one fullback is if they beat the first line of the press, let's say, he often drops it back into a 5-2-3. And one of the things they keep as a principle is these forwards pressing really narrow. Again, he does not want you having the ball in the center of the pitch. He's okay with this, with these gaps here. He's okay as a coach with letting teams have the ball in these areas. Keep this narrow, keep this tight. And then if you can cut them off in these places, block off the routes to the central areas with your press. So you need a lot of energy because in setting the traps, in pressing well, you need these midfielders to be able to step up and make these runs without overexposing these areas and keeping your forwards in narrow positions to track runs in through so there's not the routes in behind. So it's a little less intense in getting up and back for your forwards, which I think, again, suits a lot of our players as well, that they're not running from out here to left back all the time. When your left wing back steps up, he's often having this actually just shift into a back four. And it will be at that point staggered and uneven to try and keep teams in a certain side of the pitch and then switching back. So at that point, it's not even, but he's okay with dropping in here where you step up on this side to specifically cover those back post crosses and switches. In the attack, one of the things, again, that he loves to do as well, which really does suit us, it's one of the ways that we've attacked really well over times, is when you get this build-up in place, and let's say you get through to one side, is making that kind of big switch where you draw the attack over to this side with the overload, and you're able to make the switch back to this side, and then you keep the attack up, and you switch it again. There's a lot of instances of his goals where it's almost akin to, the FA Cup final, similar to that second goal, where you break the lines here, you get the big switch from one side to the other, and then you get the overloads from the runners coming back to the other side, and you switch it again. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting in there. He does settle into possession when necessary and against the smaller teams and utilize these fullbacks to overlap. The big principle there is the fullbacks set the width. The fullbacks create the width is a big part of that. So you think about central compactness, fullbacks setting the width, narrow forwards. I see a lot of ways that his tactics and principles fit us, but also why I really do not see, having watched him a lot, why any comparisons really to some of the weaknesses that Ten Hag has had. There used to be, and has been at times, if you commit a lot forward and are out of position, some of these weaknesses back here. However, again, that's something he's addressed this year. And, and one of the main differences as well is you're keeping this compact kind of two mids in the center to come and help cover for it. I do think getting a more channel defender on the side would be helpful. But given you always have three actual center backs on the pitch, there's also a little bit more coverage there, especially for when they get into those angles, to have somebody cover on the back. And again, he instructs a lot of times even that extra fullback. So it can be a 5 when needed. It can be a 3 when needed. It's not overly defensive, but it does have a lot of compactness in the center. And that is a hallmark of it, of those hardworking midfielders, and keeping your forwards narrow even in the press. So I thought that would be interesting to just go over. Maybe it sheds a little bit of insight. We'll watch him today, maybe Friday if he's still there and has to be a part of that game. We don't know yet, right? We're in discussions, about coaches, about the start time, about all of those things. So we don't really know. We don't really know yet when his start date will be. But according to a lot of decent sources, and as I understand it, they're really trying to get it done tonight so that they could get this all agreed and have him join up sooner, obviously, rather than later. I don't think that it would do much to have, him leaving and then coach 3-4 extra games for them. I don't think that does that much for everybody, but obviously, we need to work it out. Again, we wouldn't be in a rush, wouldn't have people in place trying to do all of this and have sacked Ten Hag and etc. if we didn't want this in place very quickly and didn't have some confidence. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful with where things are at, that we're basically at the point of negotiating the start date and some of the final details, and that they can wrap that up and have him join us, maybe by Chelsea, maybe after Chelsea, but potentially in the stands for Chelsea at the least. And if it all goes incredibly well, in the stands for Leicester, but that would be a tricky one. We'll see there, but hopefully you found this video informative and interesting as well. Very exciting. Again, trying to lay out the differences. This is a young 39-year-old manager who is doing the unexpected, doing to some degree the incredible, an almost invincible season with Sporting, and again, the only loss occurring in a dead rubber, and going on, maybe 3 titles in 4 years with not the biggest team in Portugal, and with a smaller budget than Ajax. Now, using that as a comparison simply because it's a former coach. I'm not trying to give a big hard time to Ten Hag. He did very, very well for Ajax, but I thought that comparison of the wages and things would shed some light on a few differences when comparing, a good coach who's come from a lower league winning things. There is a big difference there. But we'll see. There's no guarantees in football, but this is the first appointment that would be made by a data-led football structure who have done their research, done their homework, and have gone out and done it. Very exciting times. Okay, join me for the watch along later. It'll be fun. It'll be a good hangout. We'll see how they play, do all that. Should be a good time. We can do tier gate and all of that kind of stuff. Okay, thank you for watching this video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on. See you in the next one.